Welcome back to the panel discussion, Navigating the Future of Identity Management at DoD, sponsored by Okta on Federal News Network. Again, my guests today are Sabrina Lee, the Director of DoD Programs at Okta, Chris Joseph, Acting Deputy Director for the Office of the Chief Information Officer in the Army's Cybersecurity Directorate, Jason Howe, A1 Chief Information Officer and Deputy Director of Plans and Integration at Headquarters U.S. Air Force, and Drew Malloy, the Technical Director of the Cybersecurity and Analytics Directorate at the Defense Information Systems Agency. I'm your moderator, Justin Doubleday. And Drew, if we could just turn to you, it's not something we've talked about at length yet today, but how does ICAM kind of fit into this broader push toward a zero trust architecture and continuous authentication?
Yeah, for us, identity is really the basis of everything we do within Zero Trust, right? We put out the Zero Trust reference architecture in conjunction with the NSA on how we move to a Zero Trust type model. But a lot of that is based around identity of the user, identity of the device, and then looking on the application side around kind of that application level access control mechanisms and the data tagging that's associated with it. So for us, looking at an ICAM solution is key to what we're going to do. And speaking to kind of what Jason was getting at in the last segment was really around how do we make more granular access control decisions? How do we get away from this binary, you have to have a CAT card and you have to be on DoD networks in order to get access to my application? How do we make it so it's more of a nuanced approach to say, in the case, I usually use the example of Office 365 because that's really top of mind for a lot of DoD is how do we get it to where you can come in and if you have a CAT card and you're on a DoD network and you get full access to everything within your application space, right? All of your email, all of your files, everything like that. But if you come in and you are not on a DoD network or on a DoD managed endpoint, but you do have a CAT card, right? You do have that verified identity. How can we give you a different level of access control without completely saying yes or no, right? How do we get it to where we say, okay, you can have access to your webmail, you can have kind of read-only access to your files, but you can't download anything. We kind of eliminate that data exfil piece of the threat vector from coming in on an unmanaged endpoint. And then say we want to collaborate with our industry partners. They don't have a CAT card. They aren't coming in on DoD managed endpoints. How do we still have collaboration? How do we still allow them to be guests within our team sessions, without having to require that binary yes, no? Do you have, are you authenticated through DoD authentication mechanism? So for us, identity is really key on our way towards Zero Trust to say, what is the identity? What is the authentication mechanism? What network are they coming from? What is the endpoint they're coming from? Is it a managed device or not? And then what is the health and status of that endpoint? All of that can then be used to make those access control decisions to the different applications. But again, it also is going to go hand in hand with what was talked about before. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on the application side. And application owners need to be able to take advantage of all of those different attributes that will be coming at them to say, here's all of the different use cases for the different ways that we're coming in. How do you make access control decisions, on the front end to ensure, one, security, but two, user experience, and giving access to those who need access to different things without being overly restrictive of where they're coming from.
Yeah, and if I could just turn to Chris, obviously Zero Trust, I'm sure is a big push at the Cybersecurity Directorate. To what extent are these conversations about identity and Zero Trust coming together with initiatives that you guys are leading?
Oh yes, Zero Trust is huge, again, within Army, within our directorate. Identities is a key factor of any Zero Trust conversation that we've had and how we move forward. We feel identity is one of the pillars within a Zero Trust environment. It's going to come into play for not only people, entities like ourselves, like human beings, but the non-person entities, machines, our artificial intelligence. There's other non-human entities operating within our environment. And at the end of the day, we have to know who and what is operating on a network, and base that with other decisions going on within the environment, right? So we talked about being context aware. So even if you verify my identity, but am I coming from a managed device, from a known location at a known time, versus coming from a different location at a time that's not normal, right? So should Chris still have access to the same information depending on those different use cases? So again, identity is important, is key, but it's going to have to layer in and relate with other areas within a zero trust environment.
Yeah, I'm sure that plays a big role in the BYOD
Yes.
initiatives that you're working
Yeah,
on.
for sure. And we touched a little bit on data, and I know this is not a data discussion, but the data tagging I think is going to be extremely important, because all the decisions that's going to be made looking at the identity, but we need to know what's allowed, what are the parameters that allows access to certain data based on all of the other attributes that are being weighed.
Right, because you can't have a cybersecurity personnel just staring, okay, Chris is logging in from this location, and the next day we should make this decision now. That's how you get to a continuous and automated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Anything to add on your front? Sabrina?
I would just say, yeah, everything that these guys have said so far are the focus areas where we're at. We look at, for the people who don't live and breathe ICAM like we do, I would say that it really boils down to two things, doing two things continuously. One is called authentication, which is saying, are you who you say you are, right? Let me just make sure it's really you trying to access this thing. And then the second thing is authorization. Are you allowed to access this resource that I'm about to give you, whether it's an application or a service or a device? Continuously checking those things and making decisions based on, making smart decisions based on lots of attributes about you. So these guys have said it, but not just are you who you say you are and can you get to this app, but can you get to this app at this time, from the location you're in, using the device you're using? All of those things become factors now, because you're not just sitting at a DoD desk logging into something anymore. So being able to do that level of dynamic and continuous authorization is really important, and being able to scale it as well. So if you're 10 users authenticating today, but annual training is due tomorrow, so 10 million users hit you the next day, you have to be able to scale that out. And then from an industry perspective, I would just say, we have to make significant investments, and a lot of providers are doing this now, in the FedRAMP and DoD impact level spaces to support zero trust. We, industry, are really never going to get to be players in the DoD's zero trust models unless we get these certifications that are required. So, FedRAMP moderate, FedRAMP high, DoD impact level 4, 5, and above are huge priorities across industry right now.
Yeah, and Jason, you laid out eloquently in the last segment why user experience is important, and I think we've heard that user experience can actually be enhanced if you can successfully implement these principles. But are you seeing user experience play into these conversations about zero trust? If so, to what extent? Can you just lay that out for us?
Yeah, so today I hear a lot about network level zero trust. And I don't know that we've matured our conversation into the system level side. So Drew and Chris, I think we're spot on with their discussion of zero trust. I will say what worries me is that our system owners aren't ready. We could go buy a lot of zero trust software. We could buy a lot of tools. But if those system owners aren't ready to consume that amount of data in making their authorization decision, they're just going to delete all that data, right? And go back to the binary discussion. So I think it's critical that you hear zero trust mature into an enterprise discussion with system owners, not just on the the IT or the comm CIO side. And I think when you see that happen, you'll know you're on a healthy path. For us, for example, it took a while as we started with our commercial tokens now, adding in additional data. we had to work with system owners to say, now how are you going to effectively use that data to make more granular decisions, as Drew said? That is a time-consuming process. So I'd love to say Zero Trust is 1 or 2 or 3 years down the road. I think this is probably a very long journey for us to get to that comprehensive view of Zero Trust. On the upside, our commercial solution, Sabrina talked about scalability. In the first month after we turned it on with just one of our cloud solutions, we were at 500,000 sessions and didn't have a hiccup. So being able to pass the tokens and consume the tokens, right? You can't lose the fact that the system has a role as well. That all has to be tightly integrated. And that's where I think a lot of our success has truly come from using very, very large, modern, mature commercial cloud software as a service solutions. They figured this out in industry, and now I can take them through FedRAMP and then buy what works and what scales. So, if you're thinking I need to get to the millions and millions of sessions, I will tell you I have seen over the last few years as we've rolled out enterprise commercial cloud that does work. So I think these are all discussions we're going to have to get to the end state of Zero Trust. We have to take it from PowerPoint where and make it real, and that's going to take a big broad team across the DoD to make that a reality.
Go ahead, Drew.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, right? We can set up the architecture, we can procure the tool sets and create that modern Zero Trust approach, but if the applications aren't, so for us, there's pillars to Zero Trust that we have outlined in our reference architecture, and 2 of those pillars are the applications and the data, and they need to be integral in what we're trying to do with Zero Trust. If you don't have your data tagged in a way that you can make access control decisions, it's really not going to be helpful. If applications are still looking for that binary yes or no, you're allowed in, you're not, then we're not taking full advantage of all of the things that, all of the investment that we're putting in to modernize our architectures. So for us, it's really important to early and often try to espouse what needs to be done on the application side and try to bring those application owners on board with the new way of design thinking, because it comes back to kind of what we've seen with some of the pilots around the MFA that we've been doing with hardware tokens and software-based authentication mechanisms. If there are DoD applications that are still looking for the CAT card as your authentication, then it really does you no good. The user experience suffers because now you have to have both your CAT card and your hardware token in order to get into everything that you need to. So for us, when we talk about user experience, it's really key to bring the whole application owner side along with us as we're modernizing the front end architecture.
All right, and in the few minutes we have left, we've discussed this a few times. Open standards, coalescing around a common set of standards, so you can ensure interoperability and avoid vendor lock-in at the same time. That always sounds great in these big enterprise technology discussions. How does it actually happen in this space? I'll just toss that out to any of you who's willing to pick that up.
I'll make one quick comment from the vendor perspective, which is I just touched on the FedRAMP and the DoD impact level process. All of us industry vendors are sort of going through that, right? So, for example, when we talk Zero Trust, Okta and Zscaler and CrowdStrike have all these tight integrations, for example, on the commercial side. But we're launching Okta.mil this summer, which is going to be a DoD impact level certified capability. Well, it has to work with Zscaler.mil and all of the .mil services that these other vendors are bringing online. So we might have solved it on the commercial side with open standards. We still have to implement it in a DoD approved and authorized way. And that's where, if we do it correctly, SaaS is really going to take off for the DoD, but all of the vendors have to come to the table and get those .mil offerings working together.
Are any of the military organizations here trying to help move that along? Because you guys can really bring the vendor community together like really no other customer can.
I will say we sponsor capabilities through FedRAMP continuously. We also have several sponsorships active for DoD IL4 for us. We really revolve around IL4 mainly with a lot of personal information, PII. But I will second what Sabrina said. What we see happen on the commercial side isn't always replicated immediately on the .mil side because we have to help these vendors get through this process. And it's a good process. I think we've got to find ways to mature that process, accelerate that process, because success lies in these vendors being able to quickly replicate their successes on the commercial side.
Go ahead, Drew.
Yeah, I think from a DISA perspective, we're also constantly looking at industry to help us move the ball forward. We've really started to embrace the SaaS model for what we're doing, especially in light of the pandemic that really kind of accelerated things for us as to a new way of working. Previously, when we moved to cloud, it was really the infrastructure, and now we're looking at the software itself being a managed service. And how do we best integrate with that? And I will say that for the DoD, we're still always going to have those requirements that a SaaS model won't be able to satisfy. So we're still going to need to be able to have a deployable capability. We're still going to need to have capabilities in isolated or air-gapped networks. Moving up to IL6 and above. And a lot of times SaaS models don't work because they're tied to the back-end management infrastructure, on the corporate network side. So figuring out what that looks like in different environments is also a challenge for us. But we're constantly looking at industry. We're constantly moving towards COTS-based solutions and standards-based solutions, so that we're taking advantage of what's already being developed without having to reinvent the wheel or coming up with some kludgy GOTS mechanism in order for us to do our job. Yes, we in the DoD like to think that we're special, and in some use cases we are, but for the most part, we look to industry in order to innovate and help us along with our mission.
All right, I think that's a great point to end it on here today. So thank you to the guests for participating and putting it together. Really was a great show. Again, I'd like to thank Sabrina Lees, the Director of DoD Programs at Okta, Chris Joseph, Acting Deputy Director at the Office of the Chief Information Officer for the Army's Cybersecurity Directorate. And then we have Jason Howe, A1 Chief Information Officer and Deputy Director for Plans and Integration at Headquarters U.S. Air Force. And Drew Malloy, Technical Director of the Cybersecurity and Analytics Directorate at the Defense Information Systems Agency. Again, I'm your moderator, Justin Doubleday, and you're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Okta.
On behalf of Okta, thank you for joining us. The archive session will be available shortly. If you qualify for continuing education credit, you'll receive an email with your training certificate. This concludes our discussion. Thank you.